F-15 Strike Eagle saved by Falcon. And Sega announces Saturn. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time to find out what was making headlines in the home computer and video game industries of yesteryear. My name is Carl, and I'm joined again by everybody's favorite co-host, Alex.
Nice to
Hi,
be
Alex.
here. Hi. You've got the hype. You've got the hype today, I see. It's stunning new releases.
It's Mortal Monday, man. It's great. I remember hearing about this. I was so excited. Mortal Monday's coming. I'm going to pick up my copy of Mortal Kombat for the Amiga, and then it was delayed a couple of months. I was like, damn you. But, oh well.
Yes, well, Mortal Monday was for the real systems, Carl.
The Game Boy is included.
Like the Game Boy, yes.
Okay, well, hi everybody. So, we're doing September of 1993 in today's episode. We got a lot of stories here. We do have a very cool game for the 7 Minutes in Heaven. And just as a preview, once we get the technical side of this worked out, we will be doing a special 7 Minutes in Heaven Mortal Monday edition for the Patreons. But we did not get the technical stuff worked out in time for this episode. I am very sorry. But all four of the Mortal Monday editions of Mortal Kombat will be covered, as long as we can get the technical side of it worked out.
Emulation is hard, okay?
I don't even think it's the emulation. At this point, I just think it's the networking that's getting us. But we will figure it out, I promise.
We just need to build a transatlantic serial modem cable.
Something along those lines. Okay, so, Tell you what, we've got so much to cover. Do you have anything interesting or important that you would like to cover in the obligatory podcast banter section of the show?
No, not really. Just keeping on.
Sweet. Still building up over at They Create Worlds to the big anniversary episode number... What is it, 500 at this point?
It only feels like it. No, episode 200, which is the December 15th episode, but was already recorded as part of our live stream at the end of last month. Last month being October. For those listening in the future, we have unfortunately the year of the crash has broken me, and we are slightly delayed. So it's the 20th of November, 2023, as we're recording the September episode. Hopefully, sometime by 2025, I'll be back on schedule. But yeah, it's going to take a wee bit longer. This is just another example about how, those 5-year plans, those planned economies just don't work.
This is sadly true. Okay, so everybody remember the premise of the show is that we travel back in time to see what was going on in the magazines at the time, looking at the news, putting it into context. All the links to everything we talk about are, of course, always in the show notes. And we're always using cover dates of magazines and newspapers. So, yes, the news probably happened at some time before that. Don't send me letters. This is just a framing device. But if you do have comments or questions about the show, please feel free to contact us. Email address and everything else and the socials are in the show notes. Feel free to give us a like if you're listening to this on YouTube. I know there's a lot of new YouTube subscribers recently. And also follow us on Twitter and on the Old Byte server over at Mastodon, and I think there's also an Instagram account. There's a bunch of stuff. All in the show notes. And, of course, we have a Patreon where you can see a bunch of fun stuff like early access to our interview episodes and the video version of our next segment, the 7 Minutes in Heaven, where our intrepid co-hosts must play a game that they've never played before that was reviewed in a publication dated September of 1993. We had some amazing options today. We had Rocket Knight Adventure, Jungle Strike, Summer Challenge, which I actually would have enjoyed seeing you try that, because that's a piece of work. We had Pirates Gold both on PC and on the Genesis. We had Jurassic Park on the Genesis, which, yeah, that's another one that's just turd-tastic. And we even had X-Wing Imperial Pursuit, the first one where you got to play the bad guys.
Now, for the record, I have thoroughly played the X-Wing series of incredible space sims, so I don't want people to think that was ignored, because I have to have not played them. And believe me, I've played it.
Did you play Beauty and the Beast on DOS?
No.
Oh, well, then nothing. But
Carl, you're still playing the Rebel Alliance. The Imperial pursuit in question is the Imperials pursuing you.
I misunderstood that. See, I was proud Amiga owner at the time and completely missed out on the X-Wing phenomenon.
It was the first expansion to X-Wing. X-Wing had 2 expansions, Imperial Pursuit and B-Wing.
Ah, okay. Interesting. Yeah, and then TIE Fighter came. Okay.
Yes. And then you got to play the bad guys.
There you go. That was the game that looked interesting to me. But well.
I love TIE Fighter.
Yeah.
Love it so much. I've completely derailed this segment. Go on with your hype.
No problem. It's perfectly okay. So, the game that we chose, or that I suggested because it just seemed like a good idea, is the Genesis cult classic General Chaos. Are you ready, Alex?
Let's go to war.
Welcome back, Alex, from your 7 Minutes in Heaven. So, for the uninitiated, how would you describe General Chaos?
Well, it's really a kind of hard game to describe for the time period they came out in. I guess it's kind of a squad-based action strategy game. It has some RTS elements to it, but it's really more of an action game. However, it's slightly more strategy than, say, Cannon Fodder. It's like somewhere in between Cannon Fodder and an actual RTS.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly haven't played it. It's been on my to-do list for years. But looking at the way you were playing it, so you had a squad of 5 men, you could then choose which guy to move, and then they would basically just keep attacking from whatever position you put them in.
Well, right? No, you almost. I did actually have to push a button to attack as well. So you move them individually, but then when you hit the fire button, they all fire from their current positions.
Okay. That is interesting. Okay, so they never become independent entities.
Not in my brief experience, having never read an instruction manual, but I don't think so. I think you can select their weapons and you can move them individually, and you have to move them individually. You don't move them in groups. So it's kind of the strategy is kind of how you position them. And then the action is you just kind of let it rip. And then if there's a one-on-one combat, it goes all blades of steel, all action stops, and you're in this little punching match until one of you goes down. Down doesn't necessarily mean dead, because you can go down potentially multiple times without actually dying. But
interesting. And there's no scrolling. It's always a single screen.
Yeah. At least in the ones I saw, yes.
Yeah. So that reminded me very strongly of the real-time combat scenes in North and South.
Yeah, I can see that. That makes some sense.
Yeah. I mean, and those were a little bit more automated because once the horses started running, they'd always keep running. You could stop them, but you couldn't reverse with them, for example. And the cannons and so forth. So slightly different units and whatnot. And then, of course, you had the one scene with the log, so crossing over with the log. That reminded me of that as well. So, well.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, and there didn't really seem to be any kind of destroyable elements in the background.
Yeah, it definitely didn't seem like it. I had one guy hurling dynamite at a log bridge over and over again, and either that piece of wood was actually made of adamantium, or there is no destructible terrain.
But this game has some pedigree in its design, right?
Yeah, so it was actually created by the duo of Brian Collin and Jeff Nauman, who began their very fruitful collaboration together at Bally Midway, and then were the only people that stayed on for a brief period of time when they were purchased by Williams, and then they went off and created their own independent developers. So they're known for such coin-op games as Rampage and Xenophobe and Arch Rivals.
Yeah, that was a definitely recognizable, cartoony, over-the-top humor sensibility in the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has some of that same vibe, and the punching very reminiscent of Blades of Steel, as I said, but also calls to mind No Rules basketball in Arch Rivals as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and it is interesting. I mean, Cannon Fodder hasn't come out yet. It's about to come out. Syndicate is getting reviewed this month as well on the PC, which does have a lot of similarities from the perspective as well as sort of the squad-based tactics aspect of it. But I think if I had to pinpoint one of the big distinguishing factors is the approach to violence in those different games is stark.
Yes.
Because you can definitely tell it's violence as a funny thing as opposed to Cannon Fodder and Syndicate, which are very much even though they're extremely violent games, they have a very violence is the tool of bad vibe to them, and Cannon Fodder is a direct anti-war piece of art, whereas and Syndicate basically shows the people who use violence are the dark powers destroying the world.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this is playing with the ideas of the extreme, patriotism, blah, blah, blah. But, it's also, you're supposed to laugh at it almost Wile E. Coyote style.
Yeah, I mean, it has a real coin-op sensibility to it, which makes sense since there was a couple of coin-op guys that put it together.
Yeah. You could also make an argument it's really the distinction between European and North American sensibilities towards these things.
That's true. We always just, go overseas and we don't have to fight out our own terrain. We always, back in the day, I mean, this is after Vietnam too, but, Vietnam kind of changed things up a little bit, but there was always kind of this raw, off we go to save the world kind of mentality to American war with stuff like World War I and World War II. And this definitely captures more of that sensibility, whereas Europe lived through the horrors of those two wars in a far more visceral way than Americans did. And even Vietnam, which caused a lot of soul searching, is not something that most Americans had to live through. In fact, even fewer than had to live through World War II. So, I think that there is definitely something to be said for that kind of different approach to war. But then you have the Japanese, who lived through the absolute horror of the war, and they're like, yeah, let's make 1942, where the Americans are just blowing up all the ships. So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, but in 1942 doesn't have a big comedic aspect to it. I mean, it's
no, it doesn't. But it doesn't have any message at all. I'm just saying it's.
Yeah, I know.
The Japanese really, or something like Ikari Warriors, which is basically Rambo and was ported stolen as Rambo by Ocean. The Japanese have a lot more of that American sensibility.
You obviously have never played Ocean's Rambo if you're saying that. No, seriously, because Ocean's Rambo actually has you searching through the map, finding the prisoners. It's a multi-directional thing. It's not just the straightforward scrolling.
Oh, okay.
So there's actually finding items, and it's Commando meets a very, very spec-down version of an action-adventure.
That's fair.
Yeah, sorry. I don't defend the Ocean games often, but this one I do have to... I've got to give them props for at least trying.
That's fair. I'll allow it. So yeah.
If you want to criticize one, I'll give you Street Hawk. You can rip that a new one all day long.
Indeed. So
don't
yeah.
worry. It's coming. It's coming. Oh. It will be a 7 minutes in heaven. I swear. Not just kidding.
Boy, am I glad that before I started regularly co-hosting that you evolved past the point where you just assigned the games.
We can go back the old ways.
You are not a benevolent God, Carl. Your heaven is no heaven.
Hey, if U.S. senators can claim that they can start the fist fights in the Congressional building because Andrew Jackson did it, you know what? I can go back a couple years. It's okay.
Oh, Lord. Well, this has gone totally off the rails. I think, Carl, this is the point where you mercifully bring this to a close by asking me if I would recommend this game.
Yes. Would you recommend this game to players nowadays?
This game is a cult classic, and I can see why. Now, for me, I don't like playing these kind of games on a console environment. It feels very limiting, the controls, essentially. So, for me personally, I wouldn't want to play it anymore. However, if you're able to get past that control issue, which many, many people can, I would say yes, it's a fun little game. It's worth putting a little time into. It's not going to stick with you till the end of your days, but you can waste a little time with it, I think, and have a good time.
Excellent. Then everybody, go get yourself some chaos. Okay, now it's time to check in with our good friend Ethan to find out what we got wrong in our, what comes before September? August of 1993 episode.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
the Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
So,
this is the Department of Corrections.
So, what did we get wrong in August of 1993?
I have 2 switches for the both of you, because Alex is here. Hi, Alex.
Hello.
And we are going to discuss not only September of 1983, but also the interview episode, for there are a couple things on there.
Okay. Now, the interview episode with me?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Because there are a couple things of which you were confused about.
Oh, I'm confused about many things, especially my own timeline. I like to think of my personal history as a multiple choice problem.
All right, September 1983.
93.
First one.
August 93. We haven't done
August 93. Oh, God.
Ooh, Department of Corrections has been corrected.
Oh, well, August 90.
Well,
August 93, I didn't have anything. So we'll just put the... no, oh, there it is. All right, there we go. Okay.
Want to try that again?
All right. Carl, actually edit this. Don't pretend to edit it. Edit this part.
Okay.
He's going to edit it.
So, August 1993. Alex, a comment for you.
Yes.
I think you said you were discussing Dick Bushell, the great coin-op historian, and I think you said the things about what his plan was for the future, which he never, unfortunately, got to enact, and how many books he wanted to do. He wanted to do something like 10 pinball books and like 7 arcade books. I had this in somewhere because he had publicly stated what he wanted to do. But just to say, he was a prolific man. Most of his stuff is just catalog work, but the history that he puts in between all that stuff is pure gold. We could not have even the remotest bit of understanding that we do without what he did. So, salute to Dick Bushell.
Absolutely. However, shame on him for the Le Chateau de Bagatelle.
that will be I'm sure that Dale will want to come on and correct the episode there.
I can certainly believe that at some point it grew in the telling, that his plans changed. At the time he released Pinball 1, he was looking at 5 books because he named them Arcade 1, not Pinball 1. So that's probably, I think it was the arcade he was planning 5 books.
Yeah, I think after the Encyclopedia of Pinball, he kind of changed his trajectory.
Right. So that's fair. It was a moving target, but I think you're right that he did expand his horizons in that way.
Okay, Carl, put your palms out, for I've got the switch for you.
Ooh, I'm waiting. I'm waiting.
Now, all I did was hand you a Nintendo Switch. Come on, Carl. All right, first of all, EA was the publisher of the Battletoads game in the arcade.
That is fascinating. I mean, I'd love to know how that deal came about.
There were a couple other games that they didn't wind up producing. Some of them you can play at Galloping Ghost, actually, because they have kind of a program where they've revived a couple unreleased arcade games.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I mean, but I'm just curious, why EA? How did they come into contact with Rare, of all people?
Yeah, would be interesting to know.
Yeah. And EA did have a big presence in the United Kingdom, so big corporate presence. So I don't know the story there either, because the Stampers won't talk to anybody. But
that is sadly true.
I mean, it's very possible that their foreign agent was the go-between on that, because I'm sure he had a lot of decisions. Joel Hutchberg.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. R.I.P.
Then we've got 2 Carl faux pas. I'm pretty sure these are both Carl. Virtua Racing.
Did I say virtual?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Terrible.
And Kama Sutra.
What did I say? Karma?
Karma Sutra.
I probably said karma, yeah. I was thinking of the Culture Club song. What can I say?
Kama Sutra's Karma Chameleons.
Karma. No.
So we've been...
Okay, I know you have to move fast, but this is just a fun tangent. I knew a person once that had a T-shirt that had 7 commas on it and then a chameleon. It was comma, chameleon. That just ties both of these things together, comma versus karma.
And now we've been copyright striked. Oh, alas. But speaking of copyright, trademark, all this sort of nangly-dangly stuff. So the relationship between Nintendo and Sharp. I forget what the specific thing that you were going off on was, but
we were talking about the Sharp Famicom TV.
Microwave. Oh, well, yeah.
No, yeah.
And
then
the
TV
ovens and stuff. Yep.
Well, that was the trademark, and we don't know the specifics of all of that. But from 1983, they had a Famicom TV.
Mm-hmm.
They had, that was one of the ways you could actually get a Famicom at the very beginning, and then later on they had the Dual, which combined the Famicom and the disk system, and then much later on they had the Super Famicom version.
Yeah. Which is interesting that that relationship kept going with multiple systems. But they never did an N64, did they?
No. Because at that point, I don't think that I think it had been proven that the bundling a console with a TV just didn't work for normal consumers.
Gotcha.
It made sense a little earlier on, but at that point, no point.
Cool.
Then, also good that Alex is here, because this last point, to bring up to you, Mr. Smith. It is you were saying that all these companies that were on the NES, of course they contracted, of course they went and did C64 games because they ran on the 6502. But I have to say, Alex, that doesn't really hold up, because the majority of those ports were done by contractors and not from original source code at all.
That's fair. I'll take that one. There's still some sense to it, and I'm not saying this is what I said on the show. I take the criticism. There is still some point in the sense that something made to run on an NES is also going to be very friendly to another 6502 system, even though I realize there's the picture processing unit and all the special stuff. So I think there's still a little bit of technical advantage there, but you're right. You are absolutely right. I did overstate that. And
half the time, most of that, they were just porting the arcade game, not the NES version of the arcade game.
All right. I will take that.
That's true. That is very, very true.
Yeah, that's a good point. I acknowledge that.
And hopefully I'll be able to give some more information on some of those companies that did the porting in the future, because I have managed to inadvertently find a couple of these companies. I wasn't looking for them, but they appeared on my radar because of some people that I interviewed. So those unknown companies that did all those ports of Namco and Sega and Konami games, we kind of know who they are now.
Oh, that is interesting. Now, are you for which systems are you talking about?
For the home computer systems.
Oh, okay. So the British teams or the ones?
No, I mean the British
US
teams are known. The American versions of that.
Ah, okay. Yeah, because typically Apple II and PC were being done in the States or in Canada, and all the 8-bit systems, especially the C64, were done over in Europe.
Not all the time. A good portion of the C64 ports were done in America.
Well, or there were two.
It depends on the company.
Or there were two. Yeah.
Right. There were subcontracting stuff going on as well, but you in the sense of the British style games, one, you can automatically tell that they're the British ports, and two, you often know who they are. But in the when you have stuff like if you went on the internet, you couldn't look up who ported Xevious to the C64, but at least I know who that company was. Interesting.
That would be cool. How did you discover that? Just through interviews, or?
Yeah, I was interviewing some people. So in the case of the Namco ports, it was mainly Mindseed, which was a company run by two of the people who helped kind of build Namco America. And then in the case of Sega, a lot of those ports were done by Interactive Design, later who got bought by Sega, did the what's that fighting game on the Genesis that everybody always talks about? Eternal Champions, that one.
Yeah.
So that was that company. So that these relationships kind of, build over time.
Interesting. Okay, that is very, very cool. I'd love to. Are you going to write that up as a blog entry, or is it going to be part of the book?
It's not part of the book because it's this is post crash area that I'm talking about here. So not the ports that happened on the Atari, but the ports that happened on the C64 after everything kind of fell apart. Yeah. But I'm doing a little more research into it, so we'll get back to it.
Sweet.
And now for the two corrections for the interview segment. First of all, Carl, I did not play WizKid for the 7 Minutes in Heaven. I don't even know what that is.
Which game did you play?
I've played the Smurfs one, and I also played Cannon Fodder when we did the special one.
Okay, who played WizKid?
I believe somebody did, but I do not.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to look it up
because I was like, what is this? Carl gaslit me. And last one, the sound effects, the lovely sound effects you will hear momentarily when you're about to go into a jump. I came up with the idea because I hated when Carl did do-do-do-do-do.
But I never did a do-do-do-do-do in the episodes. I just did do-do-do-do.
Yes, you left it in every single time.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
No, go back.
Long-time listeners, go back and verify me because it's there. I guarantee you.
I will definitely have to take a look at that.
All right, I'm taking my Switch back, and now you can return to your frantic, fun, fabulous entertainment.
Thank you, sir. As always, your contributions and efforts are appreciated.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, that's interesting about Electronic Arts actually publishing the Battletoads arcade game. I did not realize that. I knew Electronic Arts had a short-lived coin-op division because they thought that so many hits came out of the arcade that they needed to start generating their own arcade hits. They made this decision just in time for coin-op to go into the toilet in North America. Great timing, guys. But I didn't realize they had actually manufactured the Battletoads game. So that was cool. Thanks for that one, Ethan.
Yeah. I didn't make that connection either. I mean, it was probably someplace in the recesses of my mind because I've emulated the game before. Never actually saw it in an arcade, but yeah. Okay, well, now that we've got the DOC out of the way, and so I guess it's time to turn on the time machine and head back to September of 1993.
Kid to point a gun at a television set.
Welcome to September of 1993. Alex, what's our first story?
Well, Carl, it looks like September 13th is, in fact, Mortal Monday.
You said that with such passion.
I was a Street Fighter guy.
No, you were a Super NES Mortal Kombat guy. No, just kidding.
No, sir. Never owned it.
Okay. It just came off so milk toasty. It sounded appropriate. Okay. Acclaim has pulled off a massive marketing coup by launching their home console and handheld ports of Mortal Kombat all on the same day, September 13th, dubbing the event Mortal Monday and promoting it with a now iconic ad. Mortal Kombat is set to set the world on fire.
Yeah, this is incredibly significant because this is in the time when there was still no such thing, essentially, as a street date for games. Companies would start shipping them out once it was close to the time that they wanted to release, once they had inventory. Different parts of the country would get it at different times. There was no strict embargoing of sales. They might say, hey, please don't put it on sale before this time. But when once one store decided to break the street date, then everybody would. There really wasn't a street date. I mean, you think about Atari. Atari had National Pac-Man Day, the kind of official, hey, Pac-Man's out for the 2600, but Pac-Man had been on sale for several weeks before National Pac-Man Day. Of course, Sega has by this point done its Sonic Tuesday, but that was, and while that was significant, that's the first that we know of console game street date of any time. It was still a first party release. It was on one console. It was Sega doing its own thing where they could control things much better. This is 4 systems all at the same time coming out on a single day.
Yeah, and it is big, and we also have to remember that they're not all developed by the same team.
Oh no.
So we've got Probe Software doing the Genesis version. We've got Sculpture doing the Super NES version. I can't remember who does the Game Boy version.
I want to say Probe does that one too, but I'm going to look it up because I'll get myself in trouble with corrections just saying that off the top of my head.
I'm pretty certain the Game Gear version's also Probe.
I think Probe did all of them except the SNES, but
yeah. And so it is significant that this was a big logistical challenge to get these up and running. And we'll have a story a little bit later. Well, these will not be the only formats that it comes out on. There's also going to be a PC port. There's going to be an Amiga port. Later on, there's going to be a Sega CD port. But it's significant to be out all at once on these 4 systems.
Yes, and it becomes a massive success, sells millions upon millions of copies, and really sets in motion the third parties focusing more on street dates and incredible hype when a game's coming out. Because it was even not that common at that time for individual third-party publishers to do commercials. There had been some of that in the VCS days, but ever since the NES brought back the market, a lot of that advertising was advertising that was spearheaded by the console company, not by the third-party publisher. So this is just a whole paradigm shift.
Yeah, and you also see it with the breaking up of Nintendo's monopoly. Right. Suddenly, you're not just in one ecosystem. Again, we'll be talking about more and more of that. And those who have been following the show, this is something that we've been following for the last 2 years. How the Genesis has been breaking down those barriers. Nintendo's stranglehold on the market has really, really declined at this point. And, well, it probably also won't help things come December and what's happening in Washington, D.C., wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that this is such a big television promotion. That
exactly.
Mortal Monday is visible, is going to play a role with it getting just simply the public mind share that it has.
Exactly, because EA was advertising its sports titles on television, but I'm hard pressed to think off the top of my head of much other like third party publisher advertising going on in this period before Mortal Monday hit.
Yeah. I mean, you may have had a couple of games that are tie-ins to something, like movie tie-ins or something. Like Batman probably had TV ads.
Yeah, very likely.
But, it had to be something that was already a well-established property to warrant that kind of buy-in.
Exactly. And I did confirm Game Boy was also Probe. I believe they did everything except Super NES. Of the initial 4, I have no idea who did the Amiga port.
And we do need to advise that they did leave out the blood. You had to reactivate it with a code. And, of course, on the SNES, as we've covered, it was left completely out at the behest, I should say, of Nintendo.
Yes, and it's, I believe this is one of the friends of the show. Chris Garsky is the one who has taken credit for the code idea. He was head of third-party relations at Sega at the time and came up with that compromise.
Yes, very good friend of the show. Again, interviews with both him and Greg Fischbach, co-founder of Acclaim, will be in the show notes. Check those interviews out to get a little bit more of the background on this.
Absolutely. But of course, the fighting game competition is not just lying back and taking this one, as the Street Fighter II sequel's not as pricey as expected.
The original SNES Street Fighter II cost a whopping $75 at retail, but the new Turbo and Champion editions will only cost you $69.95.
Only. Now, what was Mortal Kombat coming out at on the two big systems, on Genesis and SNES?
That is an excellent question that I'd have to look up now, because there's no prices in the ads.
No, because I'm assuming that this is a direct response to Mortal Kombat coming out, that they were doing their best to bring the price down. But
definitely. I mean, those games, the original Street Fighter II was so expensive because it was a massive cart from the size. The ROM size was huge. So that's why they boosted up the price on that one. Also because they simply knew that they could.
They sold 6 million of those things.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Upon release. But I'm guessing that, yes, this has to be a reaction to that. Also, a lot of the reviews of Street Fighter II Turbo for the Super NES are like, yeah, it's great, but is it really enough to justify buying the game again? Is a very frequently seen line. And it's, I mean, it makes perfect sense. Because
it does.
You know, let's face it, that's insane. To, you know, we're what, 2 years out from the original Street Fighter II at this, no, not even 2 years out.
No,
at this point. And that's a huge ask.
That is true. Now, I just because of the timing of when I bought my Super NES, I was not faced with that dilemma because I never owned the original Street Fighter II, but I did buy Turbo. And then I did buy Super Street Fighter II a little later on. But yeah, it's tricky because, of course, do you want to pay full retail price for essentially the same game? On the other hand, once you have played Turbo, you cannot play original Street Fighter anymore. It's so slow.
Yeah. Okay, here I pulled up an ad from a magazine, from a flyer for one of the companies, and the SNES version of Mortal Kombat was going for $69.99.
There you go.
On the same row as Star Fox, which is going for $59.99. That's already a little bit older at this point. And Street Fighter Turbo is at $69.99. So, yeah. So, yeah, they were just bringing down the price to the same price as Mortal Kombat.
Absolutely. That makes sense. But there's not only Mortal Kombat going on television screens across the United States. There is also Mortal Kombat going on in the boardrooms of the United States as Bill White switches sides.
Nintendo's former head of marketing and corporate communications, Bill White, has left Nintendo of America and joined up with Sega of America. According to GamePro magazine, White was the man behind the Nintendo World Championships and the Super Mario Bros. Movie.
I do not believe, from what I know, that he was behind the Super Mario Brothers movie, and how dare they slander the poor man like that. You have to wonder if Nintendo, told them that as a way to try to make it sound like we're good. It's good we got rid of him. Did you see what he did? But I mean, this one, so Console Wars, Blake Harris's book gives some actual insight on this. I have many, many problems with this book, but he did talk to some of these people, and so some of the motivations are true. And, Bill White was head of advertising, and he was just sick and tired of Nintendo having, in his mind, rings run around it with Sega's edgy advertising. He wanted to be given leave to strike back and do more avant-garde, more edgy advertising. And his supervisor, Peter Main, VP of Sales and Marketing, wouldn't let him do it. And he finally got fed up with that lack of creative freedom and decided to join the side that was doing those interesting things.
And it makes perfect sense. Obviously, that's going to put him in a somewhat uncomfortable position at a certain hearing in December.
Yes.
Again, if you didn't listen last time, we've already recorded our audio commentary on the Senate hearings. That'll be going up for the anniversary of those in a few weeks. But so it's just fun.
and it's really shocking too, because in this period of time, people did not leave Nintendo. There was great personal loyalty to the president, Minoru Arakawa. Arakawa being Japanese, it was much more like a Japanese company in the fact that, it was almost like lifetime employment. I mean, if you look at the people, Lance Bard just retired from Nintendo of America this year. He had been there since, like the beginning of the 80s, since like Donkey Kong. Howard Lincoln is still on the board, even after he retired at the company. He remains on the board of Nintendo America. Peter Main was there until retirement. Even, Bruce Lowry, the first head of Sega of America, he left to take a Sega position in the 80s, but then he came back to Nintendo, didn't retire there, went on to do other things later too. But it's like the pull of Nintendo is so strong, very few people leave. And so it's incredible news that there's, for people that watch this kind of thing, that are, doing the whole, see who's standing closest to the premiere on the podium kind of detective work. It's truly shocking for someone that high up in Nintendo to leave to join the competition.
Yeah. And not just any competition. I mean, if you're going to a third party or something, maybe acceptable. But this is going to Sega in the middle of the console wars.
Because, around the same time, or maybe slightly earlier, I forget the exact year, Howard Phillips left Nintendo. And he interviewed with Sega, and they were very interested in hiring them, and he ultimately decided he couldn't do it. He went to Lucasfilm Games, LucasArts instead, because he couldn't bring himself to... at the end to go work for Sega after working for Nintendo. And even, when Lowry left, it was a very different time. There was no real console war at that time. And, I've interviewed Bruce, and he said, Arakawa was supportive of him going and just basically said, don't disappoint me in the way of just, make him proud, stick to your whatever. And he never had the desire to enter into price wars with Nintendo or go truly head-to-head in Nintendo. I mean, that's what he told me in interviews. He didn't want to get in a price war or anything like that. It's like, so joining Sega and joining a Sega that's in an antagonistic posture towards Nintendo is even more shocking.
Yeah, it is. But the motivations that you explained really, really make sense. If you are a marketer, Nintendo is hamstringing you at this point. Mm-hmm. And we're going to see that exactly that is going to have to change for Nintendo. As we've talked about several times, Mortal Kombat 2, it's going to have some blood on the SNES.
Absolutely no. There's a lot of things that Nintendo certainly has to learn from Sega in this time period. And one of those is definitely how to handle releases across the pond as well, where Sega has been having such success. And I'm sure that is exactly why in this time period, Nintendo España is founded.
Nintendo has finally decided to jump into the Spanish market directly. The NES has been distributed in Spain by a company called Spaco for some time, while Herbe, the largest software distributor in the country, had the rights to the SNES and Game Boy lines. Distribution of the latter two was halted, though, after a massive fire at an Herbe warehouse destroyed their inventory, and Nintendo has decided to go it alone. Spaco will still deal with the NES, but Nintendo España will be distributing the Game Boy and SNES.
Yeah. Now, even though this is, a direct response to, a specific event, this fire, I do think Nintendo probably saw this as a convenient excuse to do something that they were probably at this point wanting to do anyway, because something that did definitely hamstring Nintendo in Europe vis-a-vis Sega is they had a very, very fragmented distribution system where they largely worked with local partners. There was a Nintendo UK, but in continental Europe, for the longest time, they were just going through a bunch of fragmented local partners, and without kind of a unified strategy as Sega had, first by having a single distributor in all of the major markets, Mastertronic, and then by having its own Sega Europe, just was much more able to plan and execute a vision for that region of the world.
Well, and this is also a moment in time when the major publishers of both computer software and console software are beginning to find their footing in Europe, at least in the really big markets. France, Germany, the UK, and even a country like Spain, which size-wise is big, but economically is still not at the same level. Yeah. They're beginning to find their own distribution. They're beginning to figure their way out. And the companies like Herbe in Spain, like Kingsoft in Germany, are beginning to really feel the pressure because more and more of the companies that are successful in their territories are going it alone. Herbe at this point has lost Ocean Software, which was their big fish in the 80s. They had Ocean and Gremlin. Now they're the exclusive distributors for Origin Systems, LucasArts, and Sierra. But those contracts are also going to run out by the end of the decade. Herbe is going to disappear by 1999. In Germany, in one of the mags this month, Kingsoft actually takes out a full-page ad talking about how, if you sign up with them, things will be great. They're in a magazine dedicated to consumers, and they're begging for distribution.
And
for people to come to them.
And I believe they end up being purchased by Electronic Arts because the main benefactors of all of that end up being the Japanese and American big publishers, because companies like Sony and Namco and Electronic Arts and Activision are able to come in and scoop up all of these distribution networks for pennies on the dollar to expand their own reach into these regions and kind of dismantle the local distribution apparatuses.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, these companies fulfilled a very specific niche. And it's not just happening in video games at this point in time. It's starting to happen also in movie distribution. It's going to take a few more years there, but once DVD shows up, it's really going to kill these local distributors. And we're slowly seeing the fruits of, at this point, the European Community, later on renamed the European Union, unifying and making it easier for these conglomerates to do business across borders. So this story, when I read it, was this nice little, capsule to take a moment to look at what the European industry looks like at this point and how it differs from the industries where the major games are actually being made. So, yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. So let's head on to another realm of Mortal Kombat, continuing our theme here as Sega beats Nintendo at CES.
According to veteran games journalist Bill Kunkel, Sega clearly beat Nintendo at the summer CES, with clearly more interest at Sega's stand and the increasing number of game publishers now releasing games for both companies' platforms meant that fewer of them wanted to be housed within Nintendo's traditionally walled-off mega stand to avoid having to rent two spaces. If this feeling wasn't clear during the first days of the show, on the final day when consumers were allowed in, then it became perfectly clear where the gamers wanted to go.
Yep, absolutely. This is the period, we've talked about before, we'll talk about it again, where that Sega marketing is working and they are attracting that older demographic and, of course, even starting to attract the younger demographic that want to emulate their older siblings. So, they've got the teenage market and they're making inroads into that 6 to 12 Nintendo market as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And everything older brother has, younger brother wants. Mm-hmm. And older brother is just not feeling the Mario of it all at this point.
No, and I believe it was somewhere in this time period. I don't remember if it was 93 or 92 or whatever, but there was a market study done that owners of Nintendo systems would usually not, child owners would usually not admit it when they were Nintendo owners. Even if they had a Nintendo, the only one they would talk about was the Genesis, because that was the one seen as cool. So in the all-important war of the playground, Sega was just cleaning up at this point.
Yeah, and properties like Sonic, and this is another story, we've talked about it before, it gets more coverage that the Sonic cartoon is about to debut. And, it's just going to solidify that character as the cool mascot character that bridges the gap between the tweens and the teens. And, let's face it, Mortal Kombat. You want your blood?
Absolutely.
We got your blood, baby.
Exactly.
You want to rip off some heads? You can rip off those heads. Go for it.
That's right. I like how you mentioned that on the show's final day when consumers were allowed in, it was perfectly clear where the gamers wanted to go, because sadly, Carl, this will be the last time we can make this kind of determination at this show as CES closes to the public.
The 2-year experiment that allowed consumers onto the show floor at the Consumer Electronics Show has ended. The organizers explained that the change comes due to exhibitor request.
Yeah, and that is no surprise, because something that was always easy to forget, especially during the heyday of E3, when the press conferences were streamed online and all of this, is that these events weren't really to market these things to the public. Even as the video game industry became so big that the public became interested in these reveals, that was never the point of it. The point of it was to meet up with the retailers and the distributors and make deals to get your product into stores. So having your booths swarmed by the public is inhibiting your ability to do business, and you have other avenues to market to the public. Like, you're not really getting anything worthwhile extra out of that public exhibition, but you're potentially losing your ability to close those all-important retail deals, which still drive the industry at this time.
Yeah, definitely, especially with retail space being as limited as it was at the time. If you just look at Toys R Us and the electronics boutique and software, etc., and so forth, really control such a huge portion of the market that, you want to talk to those people and everything else doesn't really matter.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Makes sense.
But that's enough about all this Mortal Kombat. We have to talk about the other hot things going on in consumer electronics, and right now it is multimedia that is the new hotness.
Oh, yes. We have talked several times about the rise of CD-ROM and the promise it holds for games. Now, Electronic Games Magazine has their first annual multimedia report. They somewhat reluctantly accept that the current definition of multimedia is any CD that includes more than one media type, and doesn't include non-CD games that truly create cinematic experiences like Flashback. Either way, several upcoming games are presented, and while many are just quote-unquote interactive storybooks or talkie versions of floppy games like Day of the Tentacle, or floppy games with animated intros like King's Quest VI and Chuck Rock 2, some upcoming games look interesting, using the massive storage of CD-ROM to bring tons of video like Dracula Unleashed or pre-rendered graphics to games. Star Wars, Rebel Assault, Mega Race, and Hellcab all being examples of the latter. Oh, and there's something called Myst on the horizon that gets mentioned, but that who's paying attention?
That's not important. And but for the record, I will take no slander of the Day of the Tentacle CD-ROM version, because let me tell you, the voice acting in that thing really makes the game.
Oh yeah, no, that is truly a spectacular talkie version of a floppy disk game. Obviously, if you had already shelled out money for the floppy disk game and played through it, it's Street Fighter 2 Turbo.
Yeah.
You don't want to go back to the floppy disk version once you've played the talkie. But is it really worth another $60 or whatever it was going to cost you?
Yeah, I got mine for free.
There you go.
I don't mean pirating.
No.
So, but LucasArts was very big on the OEM bundling with new CD-ROM drives and new multimedia computers. And so when we upgraded to our Pentium, it came with an OEM bundle of Rebel Assault, Fate of Atlantis, and Day of the Tentacle.
Oh, well, there you go. You've got all the entertainment you'll need for a good long while until, of course, you desperately want another chapter of Doom.
Yes. And I even got Rebel Assault too.
Yeah. Now, in this whole multimedia thing, and we're going to be talking a lot about CD-ROM today in different formats and so on and so forth. A couple of other curios that kept popping up in different sources. For example, Interplay has Lord of the Rings Volume 1. They're reissuing that as a CD-ROM game. Now they're enhancing it with 20 minutes of footage from the Ralph Bakshi movie, as well as voice acting during the game and a tutorial. And I put a link to a YouTube video of this in the show notes because it is quite interesting. If you've actually played Interplay's Lord of the Rings, did you ever play it?
Yes, and in fact, I so wanted to like that game. That was when my friend John Lewis, who got his new multimedia computer slightly earlier than I did, his OEM bundle included Rebel Assault, the original Dune, the Cryo one that we've talked about me playing in the past, and Lord of the Rings Volume 1. So I played just a little bit because we gave up on it, but I actually played the enhanced CD-ROM version of the game.
Yeah, it was a game that I had on the Amiga as well, obviously without the CD-ROM enhancements, and it was a game that desperately needed a tutorial built in. So I thought that this was interesting because it literally is just Gandalf telling you how to control the game and what the cursor does and stuff. Which I thought was an interesting use of the added CD-ROM feature, because this is still a point in time when in-game tutorials are not all that common. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was an interesting use of it. Because right now everybody's trying to figure out what the hell to do with this. Like King's Quest VI gives you enhanced artwork. Everything's moved to Super VGA from VGA. There's even a little making of the game video that's included.
And it had voice acting. They put voice acting into it as well.
Yeah. But, and here video footage from the movie. CDI is going to also be using the multimedia now. They're finally getting some quote-unquote killer apps by the standards of CDI. And they're going... You thought Sega was going for the mature audience. No, they've got Voyeur, which is a video game, if you want to call it that. Playboy Massage, The Joy of Sex. You know, these games are coming out, and they're going to be on the shelf right next to Mario and Link games.
I am sure that will bring the public coming to the CDI.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
In droves, Carl. Some real killer apps there.
Yeah, they're just going to be flocking to these machines. Voyeur, to be honest with you, Voyeur is at least going to get, I believe, a port to the PC and maybe even the Mac. So it'll have a little bit of life outside of CDI. And this is where I think it's very important to also notice this transition. You know, what do you do once you have moving pictures? Well, you're going to put porn on it.
Yes.
You're going to have to do porn. Porn industry has discovered CD-ROM. One of the biggest producers, Vivid, and a new company called New Machine Publishing. They've both started releasing CD-ROMs full of dirty pics with some video clips. It's interesting because some of the game magazines are getting samples of these for review. And there's at least 2 mentions of this month in different magazines where they're like, we don't really know what to do with this. Is this something we should be covering? Is this something that we should at least mention that's out there? Where are we? And I think this is where what you were talking about with, you know, kids not wanting to acknowledge that they have an NES. The gaming magazines, especially the PC gaming magazines, knowing that they are actually targeting an older audience, but at the same time knowing that they've got kids reading this and not really knowing where to walk the line. And this is really the conversation that we had during our audio commentary of the Senate hearings that are going to happen in December. This idea that video games, interactive entertainment is not exclusively a kid's thing, even if the more quote-unquote mature attempts at interactive entertainment still feel sophomoric or not well thought out at this point. They're catering to an audience that exists. And it's going to take a while before we really, you know, can hit the right note. So
absolutely.
And
though of course they won't have to worry about this on things like CD-ROM for much longer, because they tell me that the internet is really, really great.
Well, we do have a story that mentions the internet later in this show. So yes, the internet as a way of distributing files is coming down the pipeline. But here I got to direct Jimmy Marr, the digital antiquarian. He just did an awesome 2-part series on the history of exactly this, porn on CD-ROM. And the evolution of that into porn on the internet, and how in Vegas they got kicked out of CES. So the first year or two they were at CES, and they end up starting their own parallel convention in Las Vegas just for this product. And it's, you know, it is a major, major driver of technology, always has been, porn.
Yes.
And he does a great job of describing it in there. I'll put links to it in the show notes because it was really, really 2 good blog entries that he did on this.
Absolutely.
So,
but back to the kiddie side of CD-ROM. Let's get back to the safe space.
Well, yeah, back to the safe space. One final note on this before we get to our next big headline, but Nintendo seems to have finally given up the CD dream, with Peter Main, Nintendo of America VP of Marketing, saying, quote, CD as we see it on the market today is not the answer. There's no point in launching anything yet, end quote. And when asked about the Sega CD, he, quote, said, dead in Japan and dying in Europe. So yes, apparently Nintendo's CD-ROM drive is now officially dead.
Yes, and truly the right call. Now, in the console generation just about to start, maybe not a great call, but absolutely the right call at the time, because all of those early companies that tried to get in, Sega and NEC and all of them, Neo Geo, SNK, it just, they're too slow, they don't add anything. No developers know how to take advantage of all that extra space anyway, and it's just been a disaster.
Yeah, there's actually the first letter and letters page of Video Games Magazine actually is all about how the games on the Sega CD suck. And but they do mention that, you know, this next batch of games that are coming down the pipeline that are more about, you know, actual gameplay and making bigger worlds and stuff are coming for the Sega CD. It's just that first batch were terrible. And I can't remember who it was, but it was somebody at Sega in an interview years ago said, we needed to have the Sega CD to learn how to make games running off of a CD. Had we not had that, we wouldn't have been ready for the next generation. They still weren't ready for the next generation, but
it's like because it's like that qualified as ready.
But that's something we'll get to shortly.
Absolutely. But continuing our multimedia push for just a little bit longer here, MPEG becomes standard.
The MPEG-1 standard, as well as the Karaoke CD standard, have been adopted by a group of manufacturers including Panasonic, Commodore, and Philips.
Titans all in interactive products.
Well, I mean, all three of them are companies that currently have CD-based consoles on the market. Well, I mean, okay,
that's
Panasonic
true. Or coming.
is 5 minutes ahead. Yeah. You know, 5 minutes in the future, they will have a console on the market.
Exactly.
So this is interesting. The fact that Sega wasn't listed is also interesting, but it makes sense because they can't retroactively make the Sega CD MPEG compatible. But everybody else is like, you know, MPEG movies on CD, you know, 75 minutes at a time. This will be great.
And of course, for those that don't know, MPEG, MPEG, is an acronym for the Moving Picture Experts Group, which was a working group that was established in 1988 to create standards around video for electronics.
And it's similar to
systems.
A predecessor that created the JPEG standard way back in the 80s. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. And you know, they're the ones still with us. They're still around today, aren't they, as an active group?
I believe
so. For video.
I believe so. That would make sense. Let me see here. Yeah. In fact, MPEG 5 was just back in 2020 established. So, yes.
Yeah. So we'll see Panasonic try to do something with that in a couple of years.
Absolutely. But right now we're seeing Commodore try to do some things, some very big things, as Commodore sets big goals for CD32.
Commodore's recently released Amiga CD32 console is carrying the hopes and prayers of the entire company. The deeply indebted computer maker is hoping to sell 140,000 units of the new console over the Christmas season, with 40,000 already shipped.
Sure, guys.
Well,
that's what everyone is clamoring for, is a consoleized Amiga. Because after all, your C64 GS went so well.
Well, I mean, okay. At this point in time, Commodore's 1993 annual report, their 93 year ended actually in June of 93, showed that basically they're in the hole, to the tune of like $130 million or something insane like that. And they need the CD32 to sell about 400,000 units by the end of the next fiscal year in order to stay afloat, by some estimates. And, they still have the Amiga 1200, which is selling quite well in Europe. They've got the CD32, which the 40,000 units that they've already shipped have already sold out, basically. And the question is, will they have enough money to manufacture enough units to fulfill demand? And the answer to that will be no. Because they're going to, and this is the problem, that because, spoiler alert, there won't be an annual report in 1994 because they're not going to make it that long. It does mean that we don't really have, as far as I can tell, really good numbers on the final sales figures of the CD32 or what happened on Christmas. We'll probably get some stuff as a quarterly report at some point. But as best as I could tell so far, they only sell about 100,000 units of the CD32 in 1993. And they probably could have sold a lot more had they been able to manufacture more of them. And that's...
I mean, they would have probably sold a few more, sure. But this was never going to light the world on fire. The Amiga by this time is old technology, and... Well, I'm sorry. I know you love your Amiga, Carl. I know.
No, and this is where I'm gonna interject that at the time, because I was in Europe at the time, the Super NES is just way too expensive by the standards of what people are expecting to pay for games. Yeah. Trying to sell somebody a $70 game cartridge is not going to be a mass market appeal item in Europe at this point. But a CD32 game on a CD for $20 or $25 or maybe less was definitely a monetary proposition you could pull off. And the Amiga name still had cachet. You cannot, I mean, they were still selling 100,000 Amigas without a problem in a quarter at this point. So,
yeah.
I mean,
but that's the same. I got to stop you there, because that was the same argument for the C64 GS and the Amstrad GX 4000. You know, the 8-bit consoles are too expensive, so we'll leverage our popular, well-selling computer brands and create a console version of them. And the public just didn't want it. They either bought those more expensive systems or just stuck to their computer. I just don't know how realistic it was for this thing to gain much of a foothold.
Well, and this is the difference, that the GS, when it's being released, is a standard C64 hardware from 1982. But the CD32 is actually using the brand new AGA chipset that's only a year old at this point.
Yeah, sure, that's fair.
So, you know, this thing can run a perfect version of Wing Commander, let's say, which has just been ported to the Super NES. So if you put these two next to one another, Wing Commander on the CD32 looks much better, sounds better than the Super NES version.
Yeah, but I just played it on my computer.
Well, yeah, but this is the thing. The PC, if you're looking at it from the point of view of an Amiga owner in Europe at this point, who isn't going to be shelling out the cash for a PC, the super expensive PC. And again, this is where the American market is different. At this point in time in Europe, credit card possession is relatively low.
Mm-hmm.
If you're dropping $2,000 for a machine, you're dropping it cash, which is a major barrier to the acceptance or the adoption of PCs in Europe. The Amiga selling for, let's say, $800 is that you can plug into a television set is suddenly a very, very viable option. And this game console that you could plug into that existing Amiga monitor or RGB monitor that you've got laying around from the previous machines is suddenly a very viable replacement system. It's an Amiga 1200, but on the cheap. So, you know, they're selling it for £200.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get that. I get there's a value proposition argument to be made, and certainly you know more about the European market than I do. I don't discount. I certainly think it would have sold more if they could have made more, but I still don't know that it would have truly saved Commodore.
The company was so mismanaged at this point, it was always going to fail. There was no doubt about that. The question is, would they have been able to get enough product out there to have an install base that would have made the company interesting for purchase?
Sure.
Which is what they failed to do. So by the time they finally go up on the chopping block, and this is something we'll talk about next year, from my understanding so far, maybe that'll change as we get more of the reports and I'm able to see it in more granular detail. The market share of the company is so dwindled that there's really no point in saving the company.
Mm-hmm.
Had this been more successful, let's say by the summer of 94, they've got 500,000 of these things installed in Europe. They don't make it to the United States because of a patent issue. They didn't properly patent or license some technology in the CD-ROM drive, so they don't even bother releasing it in North America. Had they just had that 500,000, would they have been able to at least cut out a niche for themselves? I don't know. I mean, ultimately it was going to fail. They weren't never going to have the software support for major publishers, but among the Amiga faithful, especially if you plug in a disk drive to this thing and a keyboard, it becomes your CD-ROM drive on the cheap. But yeah, I mean, it would have given it at least another year or two. I'm not saying it was going to be a big success, but
okay.
No, it was always going to be just a temporary thing.
Absolutely.
But, oh well.
Well,
okay,
let's get away from these multimedia failures and go to the titans of the multimedia industry. You know, the ones you know are just going to be sticking around. As CDI, remember that one, kids, gets FMV add-on.
Philips has introduced their FMV add-on for the CDI, which will allow for up to 72 minutes of video to be played off of a single disc.
Too little, too late.
Yeah.
Of course, the CDI has been dogged through its entire existence by its poor handling of video, being delayed by years after the DVI standard for video was promulgated. So,
yeah. And I mean, they're not alone, at least, because Commodore also announces that they'll have an MPEG add-on that should be out before Christmas. The difference is that Commodore will actually deliver it. It will actually be affordable. But you're still stuck with 72 minutes of video on a disc, so you're going to have to switch discs in the middle of the movie, and it's still going to look no better than a VHS tape. And you can't record to it. So what's the point?
Well, multimedia is the future, Carl. The future of what? I don't know, but it's the future. We got to be there. You run a time machine. You know how this works.
Yeah. I mean, it's just one of these. It's one of the beautiful things about this format is to look at how everybody is so excited about a new tech, and it's just not the right timing yet. There's some piece of the technology puzzle that's still missing, And CD-ROM, for all of its great portents, is just not a good format for video. And yet they all think that that's the one thing that you're going to use it for.
And indeed. And speaking of new technology, for which has horrible timing, Saturn is Sega's future.
Tom Kalinske, head of Sega of America, has revealed that Sega could bring out a 32-bit machine tomorrow, more or less, as they are on their 5th generation of 32-bit arcade hardware, and that their next system would be called Saturn. Don't expect it in 93 or 94, though, as according to Kalinske, he isn't interested in launching a $500 system, and that the new Cinepack tech, which will improve video quality on Sega CD, will keep the now 1-year-old system their main focus for a while. Yeah. I don't know, and this is where you might be able to help me. I don't know the exact timeline of the development of the 32X and the whole internal struggle at Sega, but I've got to guess that that's already running at this point.
No, the 32X was only conceived at the CES in January of 94.
Ah, okay. So we're still not there yet.
We're still not there yet, but the Saturn itself is still undergoing development difficulties back in Japan as they come to terms with the PlayStation and the specs that have been revealed for it. So, yeah, they could not release a 32-bit machine tomorrow. They are in the deep dew.
Yeah, there's a mention of, the Saturn being able to play Daytona USA, which at this point I believe has been released in Japan, but hasn't been released in North America yet. It's been shown off maybe at one of the shows.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just the whole idea of, him like, we could do it, but it would cost too much, so we have to wait for the price to come down. I guess it has a little bit of an Osborne effect going on here as well. I don't know. I don't think this article is going to influence anybody's purchase, but it almost makes it sound like, why bother if in 94, it's already halfway through 93, there's going to be a new system. But yeah, it's, and now at this point the PlayStation hasn't shown up anywhere as an announcement, but you're right. I'm guessing that third parties must have gotten specs for the system at this point.
Yeah, they've been doing their famous T-Rex demo and showcasing the thing around and giving people an idea of its capabilities, which is why Sega panics when they realize that their system may need some adjustments to keep up to snuff.
Just a few, like an extra CPU, it's nothing big.
Nothing big.
No. I'm sure that everything will be just fine and people will, it's going to be a freaking disaster.
Which we will get to cover in future months and years.
Yes.
For the moment now, we will return to September of 1993, though, as the Japanese turn to the Yanks.
Konami, Sega, and Square have all opened new R&D facilities in the USA. Sega's is especially interesting as they apparently are working on some new 32-bit system. And yeah, this I originally had this in a different order, but I decided to switch it back to this order just because it's two different articles, but yeah, they're clearly something's going on with 32-bit.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is going to be, what is going on at Sega in 32-bit? But also
what isn't going on at Sega in 32-bit?
Yeah. But yeah, Konami and Square also investing in U.S. R&D I thought was interesting. I don't know if it's just an acknowledgement that the U.S. market is so much more viable and requires a different sensibility. Are they feeling that the Japanese game designs aren't enough anymore? I'm not quite sure what their internal logic was.
Yeah, I don't know what Konami's internal logic is. I think Square is having some of those thoughts because they've tried over and over again to interest American audiences in their RPGs, going so far as to even create the infamous Mystic Quest that was specifically designed for American audiences. And I do think that they get the feeling that if their brand of game, if their type of game is going to break in the U.S., they're going to have to try to enlist U.S. developers and U.S. infrastructure to make that happen. So, yeah, I definitely think in Square's case, it's about that.
Yeah. And so we're going to see, there's going to be more companies doing this. And I think it's also just a sign that these companies are international at this point. You can't just be sitting in one corner of the world any longer. You have to be everywhere doing everything.
All at once. Absolutely. And speaking of everything everywhere all at once, game crossovers taking off.
Very nice. Lost Vikings are appearing in Rock and Roll Racing, and Fatal Fury characters are showing up in Art of Fighting. Has the comic book boom with its love of crossovers finally infected video games?
I would say probably. I think there's a sense, probably, as the graphics, the sound, the multimedia, and everything are getting more sophisticated, and you can more easily create distinct and identifiable characters, that companies are thinking more in terms of building their brands, especially now that it isn't a monolith anymore. Back in the day, you put out Nintendo games for Nintendo, and yeah, you had your Mega Mans and your Simon Belmonts and whatnot. But, just if you were on the Nintendo system and had a good game, Nintendo was going to look after you. But I think a lot of these companies now have to think about themselves and how to build brands around their own properties without, the big console companies providing that umbrella anymore.
True. And also they've gone through a generation switch. They've seen how, you move from one platform to the other, you move from one generation to the other. These characters survive sometimes from one generation to the next. I mean, the Fatal Fury, the Neo Geo characters, that was the special one. I mean, the idea of Art of Fighting is going to carry over through Fatal Fury. It's going to carry over to all the fighting games that Neo Geo has produced since then. Not Neo Geo, but SNK. Has produced since then. And that is pretty powerful. Obviously, we don't get too many references to the Lost Vikings nowadays from Blizzard. I wish we did, but we don't. They occasionally show up here and there, but
they are in World of Warcraft.
This is true. This is why, I'd love to have another Lost Vikings game. Why can't we have another Lost Vikings game? What's wrong? Why can't we have nice things?
Because World of Warcraft makes all the money and Overwatch makes all the rest. Anywho, speaking of building up brands, Acclaim is wheeling and dealing.
While Acclaim has already released some WWF games, they have just signed a long-term deal which will see them continue their relationship with the pro wrestling monolith. They have signed up Park Place Productions to distribute their CD-ROM titles, including upcoming 3DO games, and High-Tech Expressions will be bringing their games out on computer formats in the US, most notably Mortal Kombat, while Virgin will be doing the honors in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, Acclaim is in some ways kind of a reverse Electronic Arts, not in the sense of having the same model as artists as rock stars and all of this, but EA is a company that expanded out of the computer game industry and then advanced very aggressively into consoles in the 90s to become this big $500 million company. And Acclaim is kind of moving the other way. They've been in consoles, and now they're trying to expand out into all of these other formats, and they are also in the process of becoming a $500 million company. These two companies will be very close to each other once Mortal Kombat hits in terms of size, and then Acclaim will do some things that they shouldn't. But yeah, Acclaim at this time is, they and Electronic Arts are the big American players, and so Acclaim is expanding their clout to other areas.
Yeah. And I mean, another big deal that they sign is that they sign up James Cameron for movie rights. I mean, Acclaim has always been doing movie adaptations. They bought up LJN that was more famous for that.
Right.
And I'm sorry, I jumped over the headline for this just because it really should have been.
It makes more sense. It makes more sense as a note than a headline. We're good.
So Acclaim has also signed a deal for video game rights to all the movies that James Cameron currently has contracts for. The next title will be the Arnold Schwarzenegger pick True Lies. As far as I can tell, that's the end of their deal with James Cameron, because the next two movies that he is involved with are Strange Days, which he only produces. There's no video game tie-in for that. I can't imagine why not. And Titanic, which also doesn't get a video game tie-in, although I'm sure that they could have done wonderful things with Mode 7 as you keep trying to run up the ship as the ship keeps twisting and twisting. But I would have loved to see
this was not the best time to get on the James Cameron bandwagon to make video games.
Yeah.
Great time if you want to make money in the motion picture business, but not so much for video games.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think he was still attached to do Spider-Man. So that would may have made sense, especially since Acclaim already had the Marvel license.
Right.
But, that obviously disappeared.
But in terms of celebrities that still perhaps had some video game life left in them, Barkley signs with Accolade.
Charles Barkley, the young, attitude-filled NBA sensation, has signed an exclusive deal with Accolade. The deal will lead to 2 shut-up and jump games and cause Barkley to be left out of NBA Jam Tournament Edition. I mean, this one was important not because Shut Up and Jump is relevant, but because this is going to show the importance of these sport-wide licensing deals.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, right now, Michael Jordan is signed up with EA. He's doing, In-Flight and a couple other things. You've got Barkley going over here. You've got a couple other sports that are having this issue. And Barkley, the story goes that he actually is really ticked off that he's not in Jam, an NBA Jam, and actually has an extra version of the game made just for himself, where he's in the game. So I think that the value for the players of being recognized and the symbiosis with the games, this is a perfect example of why there's a value in all the players being in the same game.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, this month also in Europe, Lothar Matthäus, the head of the German team that made it to victory in 1990 in Italy, he's getting his own tie-in soccer game. It's an absolute dog of a game. No point in thinking about that. And there's the absolute worst press photo ever where he's sort of looking over his shoulder in front of a PC and he's got this look like, I don't know what the hell's going on. And that's the picture that they send out to all the mags. It's repeated in every magazine in Europe this month. It's really, really terrible. But, the individual sports star getting signed up for a game, it seems to be an era that's coming to an end.
Indeed. And we will end our look at the console industry with what seems to be becoming a recurring segment on aeroplanes as a game while you fly in Europe.
In-Flight Phone International, the same company that has been partnering with U.S. Air to provide telecommunication and game services to flyers in the U.S., has partnered with the U.K.'s Mercury Communications, a subsidiary of the U.K.'s Cable and Wireless Group, to create a ground-to-air network costing an estimated £10 million to provide telecommunication and game services on European flights. And it's just another one of these services, but the issue that it's the whole idea of having this constant communication going on, especially for business travelers, and it becoming an almost expected aspect of life, is a weird precursor to the internet era that's coming in a couple of years. This idea that, why shouldn't I have my communication all the time? And of course I'm going to be playing games on this network and blah, blah, blah. And it also comes at the same time that we're getting Sega and Japan Airlines have announced the Mega Jet, a handheld version of the Mega Drive that will hook up to the built-in screens in business class. Passengers will be able to rent the devices while in flight, and a selection of games will be available, or you can bring your own. So this is another alternative. It's not networked, but hey, Sega games, Mega Drive games while you're flying, seems like, why not? Yeah,
I guess.
Your facial expression is like, why would you do this? That's what you have a Game Boy for.
Pretty much.
Yeah. And this is, again, it falls, I think, more into the category of interim solutions, while the true breakthrough technology will be a standalone, personally owned device with internet connectivity, aka the smartphone. Which is still, a decade plus away, but it's, everybody's trying to get this information access point to people because they feel that there's going to be value in it, that people will pay money for that service. It's just the technology to make it truly portable and usable and battery efficient doesn't exist yet.
Yeah. But we have a different solution for those people on the go as Top Guy takes the NES on the go.
A company called Innovation has shown off a prototype of the Top Guy, a color portable that will play Famicom games and US NES carts with an adapter. The system would eventually be released, but apparently only 1,000 units were made, and some models didn't even have a screen. Yeah, this thing had... Some models, the main models, had screens, but they also had a video out on them. So you could plug it into a television set and just use the controller as the controller. So it's basically a portable NES.
Yep.
And it's obviously something from the Far East. But, NES clones. It's a thing. They're still around. It is.
Famiclones, they are real. All right, well, that's enough about the console industry and the handheld industry. Time to turn to computers. And our big story here is Microprose bought by Spectrum Holobytes.
After their latest financial report showed that Microprose only had a measly $200,000 left in the bank, fellow flight sim aficionados Spectrum Holobyte have swooped in to pick them up in a $10 million stock deal. The company merger is in reality a straight-up purchase by the more financially stable Spectrum, with Wild Bill Steely stepping down as president and CEO of Microprose and giving Spectrum voting rights over his 55% of Microprose stock, after Microprose reported a loss of $5.3 million in the fiscal year ended in March 93. Sales were up at Microprose, but the cost of production rose too sharply and products did not make it to store shelves on time.
Indeed. So to get into corporate shenanigans, which I always love to do, yes. Spectrum Holobyte, or rather Sphere Inc., which was the actual company, and Spectrum Holobyte was the label, had been part of the Maxwell empire that took a little dive off of Mr. Maxwell's yacht into oblivion. And at that time, they were able to extricate themselves by getting venture funding. Basically, venture funding bought them out of their predicament and made Sphere an independent company. And so now they had venture funding and they were kind of flush with cash, and the market was consolidating, and so Microprose seemed like a great target. They were friends, Gilman Louie and Bill Staley, and of course, Spectrum had previously bailed out Microprose when they were in the middle of their troubles as well. Wait, it was the other way around. I'm sorry, it was the other way around. And of course, so edit that. Really do edit it. And Wild Bill had helped bail out Gilman Louie when they were having some of these troubles keeping afloat during the Maxwell collapse. And so that all kind of made sense. And what this provided for the VCs that were now at Spectrum is it actually provided for Sphere to become a public company because Microprose was publicly traded. So what happened is that Sphere and Microprose merged and formed a new company called Microprose Inc., which was a publicly traded company. And then for the time being, they kept the operations separate. So there was still a Spectrum Holobyte label and a Microprose label. But the company at this point was actually Microprose, though, as you said, it was the Spectrum/Sphere folks in the position of power doing all the buying up. They just decided to keep the Microprose name because that had a little more cachet than the Spectrum name.
Yeah, definitely, because Spectrum really had Falcon and Tetris, but there wasn't a lot in that portfolio that otherwise would have been recognizable to your average gamer, whereas Microprose, I mean, it's got Civilization, it's got Railroad Tycoon, it's got all of these titles, either out on the market or in the pipeline. It's just, as Wild Bill Steely told me when I interviewed him, link in the show notes, there just were too many things that had gone wrong at the company with the arcade division, some failed attempts to really take advantage of the console market. They left their normal areas of expertise and got into point-and-click adventure games and RPGs, spending a lot of money on game engines that went nowhere. So, yeah, it was just growing pains as an industry got into much, much bigger, costlier productions, and they didn't have the infrastructure to really manage those kind of projects with the quality control that they needed to implement. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. Sad, but a sad ending to a very, very amazing company. But
absolutely. A company that we kept trying multiple times to call Microsoft. So let's go ahead and talk about Microsoft for a second as Windows goes to the arcade.
Microsoft has announced Microsoft Arcade, a compilation of 5 classic Atari arcade games that will run under Windows 3.1. Centipede, Tempest, Battlezone, Missile Command, and Asteroids should prove the naysayers wrong when it comes to getting fast action running on the PC GUI. Did you ever go to the Microsoft Arcade?
I did not.
I actually,
we had a Windows 3.1 system back in the day, 3.11, but no, never did Microsoft Arcade.
I actually did play these very, very briefly, and they are, in fact, just straight-up ports of the arcade games. I mean, there's not a lot to them from a modern point of view. But for the time, they actually ran very, very well. I mean, I would not put them in the 60 frames a second, absolutely amazing emulation category. They are reprogrammed games. They're not emulated, and they're clearly chugging along. But it is an interesting proof of concept because it is being promoted as, hey, you can do action games on Windows.
Yeah. And, it's interesting for a couple of reasons. It's Microsoft taking their first steps to try to kind of up their game, beyond just Flight Simulator. And it's one of the very first retro products like this as well, where it's a compilation of old games and trying to hit that nostalgia factor. Because if you were a teenager in 1981, then this is 12 years later, and you're about ready, or you've just hit your 30s somewhere around then, and the nostalgia's starting to kick in, and there's starting to be a market for this retro thing.
That's true. I mean, they could have just tried to do random games. We've already had, the Windows. We've had some game packs already, but you're right. It's that is interesting that they're going for actual licensed arcade games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, nostalgia is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Well, we're going to get some more of that before the show is over.
In fact, I think this headline probably has more to do with Carl nostalgia than it does anything else, as Lucasfilm sends Amiga owners mixed messages.
Apparently, Lucasfilm has announced that Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis would be their last Amiga game, dashing the hopes of many a floppy disk jockey. A report in German magazine Amiga Games gives a glimmer of hope, though, as apparently UK publisher US Gold is in talks with the scum makers to continue porting games to Commodore's system. And yeah, the reason I included this is we talked about this briefly a month or two ago that what's the name of the company again that makes the Templar point-and-click adventures, Broken Sword?
Oh, Revolution Software. Yeah.
Revolution Software got the rights to port King's Quest VI to the Amiga. And they didn't do a straight port of the Sierra code like Sierra had done in the past, which led to almost unplayable Amiga ports because it was just so inefficiently made. They reprogrammed the entire game, all the game logic in their game engine, which ran very, very well on an Amiga. And so the idea now that US Gold, which was distributing LucasArts games in the UK at this time, wanted to maybe take this over and do something similar to what Revolution did. Mm-hmm. Again, we just talked about how these publishers in European countries were now under pressure because more and more of the big publishers were doing their own publishing. They didn't need the middlemen anymore, and they're trying to reinvent themselves as game makers, or at least rely more on their own developments. This could have potentially been an option for them, to at least get into this and keep the Amiga market alive in this very lucrative area. I mean, people were more likely to pirate a 1 or 2 disc action game than to pirate the 14 disc, mega games. And here a shout out to our good friend Guillermo Crespi of the Modo Historia podcast. He just did a podcast on the history of Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. And he actually asked me, was the Amiga version 14 discs? Because all the official records say that it was 11 discs. And I had to correct him. It was 14 discs if you didn't have an original copy. So, yeah. Just saying.
So, ladies and gentlemen, notorious Argentine software pirate Carl Curas.
Just saying. So the idea here really is that it's interesting because, again, it plays into this idea of what are the European distributors going to do once all their providers of software have started to distribute their own product. And in that context, this makes sense because they're losing their platforms. They've pretty much lost the 8-bits now completely. They're about to lose the Amiga, and the PC, if it's just one SKU, a lot of these big companies can do it themselves. So what does that leave for US Gold?
Getting bought out by IDOS, I guess. Anyway.
Very true.
Speaking of diversification, a different kind of diversification is SSI diversifies AD&D.
SSI, holder of the coveted Dungeons & Dragons license, or at this point not that coveted, is preparing for life after their aging gold box engine. We first reported on the license and the engine back in and I'd have to look up the jump again, but it's many, many moons ago. And now that its core platform, the C64, is dead and more user-friendly and graphically appealing games have hit the market. In addition to their new game engine that will debut with using the Dark Sun setting, they have strategy games Stronghold and Fantasy Empires in the offing.
Fun fact, there is no life after the gold box engine for SSI.
Yeah. Again, our good friend Jimmy Marr did a wonderful multi-part series on SSI and its travails with the gold box engine. And you can also check out my interview with Joel Billings, founder of SSI, for more on this. But yeah, I mean, they're trying. And also, interesting side note, apparently SSI was looking for a buyer at this time. And Spectrum Holobyte was lined up to buy them. But then Microprose came knocking on their door and Spectrum decided to buy them instead. So, and the D&D license, I believe at this point, has only been extended for another 18 months. As an exclusive.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, the gold box engine has gone on too long. The new game engine is taking too long. And, it's not going to turn out well.
But it's telling a larger story here as well. And our story about Microsoft, our story about Microprose and Spectrum Holobyte plays into this as well, is that as the cheaper and simpler developed for 8-bit systems are, finally going completely out and PCs are becoming more and more sophisticated gaming machines, the cost of developing engines, developing games, developing software is going up at a rate that these 8-bit computer game companies that were used to being able to do smaller development with smaller teams and whatnot just can't keep up with. I mean, SSI, most of the company, like Joel Billings' extended family, is still mostly on the hook if this company goes out. I mean, not only are they still a closely held company, they're basically still a family-held company. And in this changing and growing market, that's just not going to be an option anymore. And so we're going to see more and more of these stories where cracks begin to show in the traditional computer game publishers in the United States as they face a new, much more expensive, far more uncertain future.
Yes, definitely. And a lot of them have always relied on these much slower paced games. A lot of them are relying on, good programmers, but not great programmers necessarily. And suddenly they're going to get hit. I mean, SSI still isn't really preparing for Ultima Underworld-like worlds. They will launch a first-person game engine for 2 Ravenloft games and Menzo. No, not Menzo Branson.
Yes, it was. Oh, yeah, it was Menzo Branson. That was. Yeah, that was. I've played that one. That was first-person.
And SSI has been buying up a bunch of European imports like Legends of Valor. They published that in North America, and Surf City. Well, it's the Settlers renamed Surf City, and so forth. But they don't have an identity, and they are not up to speed with what the people want. Once Doom shows up, they are really lost.
Pretty much.
Yeah. And all these other attempts to reinvent the wheel could have used it. I mean, Stronghold is a very, very solid game developed by Stormfront, friend of the show, Don Daglow's company. But it could have used, a Stronghold 2 fixing some of the bugs would have been an amazing title. But it's never going to get that iteration option. Dragon Strike, the flight simulator done by Westwood Associates. If it had had a second game, it would have really been great. But they keep trying these things. They don't really hit the first time. They're not iterating. They're not... And they're always relying on these outside independent studios that are just always worried about where's the next project coming from. And so, yeah, it's the changing market, the changing requirements, the changing investment. They're just not ready for it, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And speaking of investing in changing markets, Psygnosis partners with MDI.
Psygnosis has announced that they will now take over distribution of Media Design Interactive's catalog of CD-ROM software, which consists mostly of educational titles geared towards school use. I couldn't find much on them, but they seem to have been big in the Archimedes market and would later release several titles for DOS, such as the Christopher Lee starring Ghosts, under the Sony Entertainment banner.
I've kind of talked about this before, but, while Media Design Interactive and its educational titles themselves don't matter in any way, shape, or form, Psygnosis is getting very comfortable with CD technology at a very critical time, and this is going to pay dividends in them driving the success of the PlayStation product, not just in creating the occasional hit game like Wipeout, but really understanding how to work with programming CD-ROM games and making games for CD-ROM system as they work on the development systems that everybody uses for PlayStations.
Yeah. I would almost say it's kind of like they know that they're going to have to do a lot of CD-ROM development for some reason now that they've been purchased by Sony, and they may just be positioning themselves and acquiring the talent that they need to actually implement that.
Could be.
A company that's already making CD-ROM educational tools may just know how to make interactive stuff running off of a CD-ROM drive. Just saying.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, over in Deutschland, they are taking a different approach to the threats in this rapidly changing market that we discussed as ad games continue to proliferate in Germany.
The The German phenomenon of games created by companies and then either given away or sold at minimal cost continues. The meat snack Beefy has a point-and-click adventure that puts the player in the role of a wannabe movie star while trying to get you to eat their reddish sticks of salt. The department store Karstadt has a sci-fi strategy game that attempts to teach young'uns about brick-and-mortar retail so they may sign up to be apprentices in their stores, and the Bausparbanks LBS has a point-and-click adventure set in the 1920s Chicago that somehow will teach people how to save money to afford a home or home improvements. A semi-sequel to Vision, another adventure game with a bank as a location set in a distant sci-fi future. Michael Bohne, head of game developer The Art Department that we've discussed previously on the show, explains that the average PC user is also a PC gamer, even if casually, making marketing efforts in the form of games, especially ones where the product or service is integrated into a narrative, a compelling prospect for reaching and engaging with a very diverse group of people that is not the usual PC user stereotype. And this is interesting because, and we talked about this about a year ago when this guy first shows up on the scene. And his isn't the only company making these, but he's kind of made this into a cottage industry. And he's citing market analyses that he's run or somebody else has run, showing that, all these PCs in offices, be it the secretary using it, the accountant or whoever, they've all pretty much got some kind of game installed on there. They're more than willing to install games on their PCs. And he's hoping that by making these games available as legitimate games, not pirated copies, they can, reach an audience that would otherwise not be reached and engage with them for hours and hours on end in a way that traditional advertising can't do, especially not at the price.
Yeah. No Pepsi Man, though.
No Pepsi Man, unfortunately. But this is the other thing. He's keeping the cost down by not doing anything that requires a high-end computer. They're not action games. These are almost all adventure, turn-based style games. They have a relatively large amount of artwork. They're not getting the greatest game reviews of all time, but pretty much all the magazines, even the ones that are quite critical, are like, no, the game is not great, but hey, you're paying maybe 5 marks for this disc, as opposed to 70 marks for a standard game at this point. So, hey, for a couple of hours, yeah, go for it. It's fun. That's the attitude that they're taking.
And now, in the modern era, that we have been inundated with crappy little iPhone and Android apps, we no longer make that argument.
This is true. This is true. I mean, this is still a moment when, like we said earlier, brick and mortar distribution of software is pretty much the only game in town, with the exception of, the few people who can afford to go on BBSs and whatnot to download something. And so this is a really, really viable option, especially for the casual user who's never heard the term shareware before.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And now we need to have a brief somber moment here as Tandy to sell off computer manufacturing operations.
Radio Shack's parent company, Tandy, is intent on selling off its computer manufacturing operations. This will not end their involvement in PC retailing, they are quick to point out. AST Research Incorporated is set to buy their manufacturing operations, and AST-made machines will be sold at Radio Shack stores. So,
yep.
The voyage that began back in the 1970s with Tandy being one of the Trinity with the Trash 80, TRS-80, is finally come to an end.
Yeah, I mean, with the Clone Wars and everything, there's no place for an OEM manufacturing operation that just feeds their own stores, because the PC has become so ubiquitous now that other manufacturers that are feeding the entire market can get economies of scale that Tandy, I presume, just cannot compete with, being a single store OEM. And it just doesn't make sense for them to be doing their own manufacturing anymore under those circumstances.
Well, that, and one of the analyses that is made is that they can't keep up with the pace of change in the hardware like mail order companies like Gateway and Dell can.
Yep.
That's the real killer, because by the time they've manufactured and moved it around the country to the retail stores, the machines are already outdated. Hardware in the PC realm is just changing too fast at this point.
Exactly, which is what's going to be the death knell on Radio Shack, even doing retailing of computers, and not too much longer. Because, I mean, the importance of the Tandy brand had always been that for much of America, small town America, that was your electronics store. That was your computer store. But, the Gateways and Dells of the world have opened up cheap PCs to everybody via mail order. You no longer need to be near a big box retailer or a computer specialty store that sells these things, which is going to, throughout the remainder of the decade, make Tandy and Radio Shack more and more kind of obsolete. The mail order and then the internet is just kind of the death knell for the Radio Shack model of, we're the only game in town, so you'll take what we have and like it.
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of sad because it's the first of the Trinity to jump out of the business, and just barely beating out Commodore, but they're the first.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, on the peripheral front, MediaVision gives Sound Blaster a run for its money.
MediaVision's Audio Spectrum sound card standard is apparently giving creatives to Sound Blaster a run for its money, especially with professional and semi-pro audio buffs. MediaVision is also offering a spec-down version of their cards through Logitech. And, yeah. You familiar with these?
No, I am not. Never had a MediaVision card.
Yeah, MediaVision, they're around for a little while. The main reason I brought them up is to highlight the fact that with all the standards constantly changing, the idea that Sound Blaster wasn't going to continue to be the standard was something that's still in the air. I mean, until Windows 95 and Direct Sound takes over and basically makes the manufacturer standards obsolete, everybody's constantly on pins and needles. The articles are like, well, is this the new thing? Is it going to replace it? We just had AdLib 2 years earlier. Then we had Sound Blaster. Now we have Sound Blaster 16. Now, MediaVision is not going to replace them. Just because they're not going to get as much software support. They're going to be too expensive, and the spec-down version that Logitech sells, Logitech, obviously, the mouse people, is really going to suck. I mean, suck hard. They're going to launch it with the drivers only on a 5.25-inch floppy disk. Just the concept, and it's going to cost about 25% more than a Sound Blaster 16, and its Sound Blaster 16 emulation on the board is going to be really choppy. So yeah, not a big thing, but the fact that they're giving it a go, that it's even an option to fight the standard at this point, it really shows how in flux the PC market still is.
Absolutely. Yeah, but Chicago is on the way.
We've talked about Chicago. Chicago's in the room, baby.
Chicago's coming, but MediaVision has other ambitions as well, as MediaVision gets into interactive movie biz.
Yes. The lines between hardware and software blur as MediaVision has announced Hyperbole Studios, which will use its virtual cinema engine to make multimedia games.
I look at that name they chose and how hyperbolic the entire interactive movie industry was. And it's like, did they know? I mean, I think people knew that people were speaking in hyperbolic terms about interactive movies even back then, obviously, but people still did legitimately believe they were the future. So to name your studios after basically, all hype, no substance kind of language, it's like, what game are they playing at here?
Well, curiously enough, they're still around. This company has survived to this day, apparently.
That's amazing. Amazing.
And the virtual cinema engine apparently is still being used for certain things. Gets used on an X-Files CD-ROM game back in the day and stuff. According to Moby Games, the latest entry is from 2019 or 2020. So my guess is that it's probably not used for games directly anymore, but it's probably used for training tools or something of that sort.
Okay, so actually the company did not survive. MediaVision did not survive.
No. MediaVision is going to implode in about 2 years in a huge scandal. Sorry, I didn't want to do the spoiler on that. There's going to be a huge scandal. I believe the head of the company ends up going to prison. No. MediaVision is going to go down in flames in a whole different messy way.
Yeah. Gotcha. No, my mistake. Sorry for ruining the ending there, guys. Spoiler.
Yeah, spoiler alert. We'll come back to it at some point.
Indeed. And now we will end our computer coverage as we often do with a nostalgia story, but this one actually hits both of us in the nostalgia feels. For sure, Scorched Earth reviewed in CGW.
Yes, the only DOS game on my RetroPie setup, and the game I spent countless hours playing with friends on my buddy's DOS machine, gets tested in Computer Gaming World magazine. The super simplistic turn-based artillery game is probably the best time you can have in front of a screen while drinking beer with friends.
Unlike you, I have not played this since the 90s, but my friend John Lewis, who I mentioned earlier, he of the CD-ROM system. We played so much Scorched Earth back at the day. Loved playing Scorched Earth.
You know what? It was interesting because in this review, they gave the address of the creator so you could, send in to register the game. And I looked him up. He's still out working and stuff, and he still has the website up where you can download it.
It's
fantastic. An ancient old website, and he has a cafe press store, and you can buy a T-shirt that says something along the lines of, I wasted my youth playing Scorched Earth with a screenshot of Scorched Earth on it.
Well,
I was this close to ordering the shirt. It just felt.
Yeah, I take exception to that T-shirt because I do not believe that youth was wasted, good sir. Yeah, no, that was the indie game of the 90s, man. I mean, before we had an idea of what indie games were. Because, it was just a guy that put it together and put it out on the internet. And, I think it was shareware. You basically got the whole game for free, but if you paid, it unlocked a few features of some kind or another, I think. But you got a perfectly playable game just for free. All sorts of fun special weapons and... love me some Scorched Earth.
Yeah, no, we used to play, my buddy Yurik, his computer was in this tiny little room that was little more than a broom closet. And I still remember we'd have like 5 guys piled in there, 3 deep. And just passing the keyboard back and forth so each person could take their turns. And I was doing this at parties just a few years ago still. And when I had this I'd have it either on a computer or on a Raspberry Pi and just, spend all night passing that keyboard around, to, set up your shot and blow the other guy apart. And I mean, no disrespect to Team 17, but Worms was never quite as good as Scorched Earth. Yeah. I mean, the moment you could move the tanks around, it took the fun out of it. It took the immediacy. It took... Yeah, no. Scorched Earth is Scorched Earth is Scorched Earth.
I agree entirely. Moving on to just a little bit of corporate news. Sega gets into toys.
Sega has announced plans to branch out into electronic toys. This seems to be an announcement for the U.S. market, as Sega has owned Japanese toy maker, and I'm going to kill the pronunciation, Yonezawa, since 1991, and the company was renamed Sega Yonezawa for several years before getting its current name, Sega Toys.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just the continued extension of Nakayama trying to turn Sega into the next Disney. You can't just have the amusement parks and the video games. You got to have the merchandising.
Yeah, but it is curious. I looked up some of the toy catalogs from this era, and I couldn't find any Sega-related merch. No Sonic toys or anything like that. I'm guessing because that stuff did exist, that it had already been licensed out to somebody else. It's kind of like Lucasfilm not, making their own games and stuff.
Right.
To a certain extent.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, I'm not sure if Sega Toys is then also the ones that start to do some of the electronic toys, like the electronic books and stuff, if that comes out under their name or directly under Sega.
Yeah, not sure.
Yeah. But at least they're making a go of the toy industry in the U.S.
Absolutely. Then turning to the online world, TSN goes paperless.
The Sierra Network has decided to no longer send out paper bills and will only accept payments over money transfer or credit or debit card.
Putting their accounts receivable where their mouth is.
Well, and this is where I didn't ask Ken Williams when I interviewed him about this, because I didn't know about it. But the idea of how do you charge for online services in a day and age when online payments haven't really been perfected, so it seems weird that you have this online service, but you're still getting a paper bill every month that you have to send in a check for. But, at the same time, it makes sense. It's cutting down their costs because TSN is burning through money. And maybe it'll make it easier for people to forget that, they're paying for it every month. But
that is the hope.
The thought is. Yeah, it's the hope.
Absolutely. Very interesting. Now rounding things out with a few miscellaneous stories, starting with Andy Eddy leaves video games and computer entertainment.
My go-to magazine when I would visit my grandparents over Christmas in the U.S. as a kid has lost its editor-in-chief. Andy Eddy has left video games and computer entertainment, and not only has a new chief, Mike Davila, taken over, but the mag has gotten a name change to just Video Games, the Ultimate Gaming Magazine. No high expectations there.
Yeah. Well, and I know you have a note that's going to kind of make this point even better, but we're seeing the impact of the Sega generation of marketing here. This is really a generational change, at the magazine. Everything has to start getting more edgy. Everything has to push up. So it's not video games and computer entertainment, which is such a mouthful. It's the ultimate gaming magazine. And as the decade goes on, we're going to see advertising in magazines get more and more extreme. And it's like this, it's the Sega effect, really. And this is one of the... Andy Eddy's basically one of the casualties of the Sega effect, the old guard that's just have some fun reviews and some fun rumors, needs to give way to something cooler. I hate to use that word, but cooler.
But it's totally there. I mean, and one of the things that I've been seeing in the ads for at least a year now are all these, or in the magazines, are ads for all these new comic books coming out. Because we are also in the speculator bubble for comic books. Mm-hmm. And it's all the super extreme, ultra, blah, 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 blah characters that are being invented left, right, and center to sell you a new number one that surely will be a collector's item someday.
So be sure to buy 500 of them now, kids, because they will only appreciate in value.
Yeah, exactly. And by appreciate, I mean be worth nothing.
Yeah.
So Andy Eddy, if you don't know, at this point in time, he's got an extremely receding hairline. He's got a somewhat dopey-looking mustache, but I always felt that his writing was very insightful. The video game and computer entertainment was one of the more well-researched magazines with an absolutely amazing news section that was at the front of the magazine, not at the back like Game Pros. And so the letter to the editor this time around in this new version of the magazine actually spends a huge amount of time dumping on Andy Eddy. Talking about how, you no longer will see a photo of some guy, who looks like Jay Leno, which is just, mean-spirited. Because, there was always a picture of Andy Eddy on the editor's page. And he talks about him, having a midlife crisis, and hopefully he doesn't buy, a red sports car or something like that. It's just so bad. And a lot of the design of the magazine, the layout of the pages is almost identical to the old one. But now you've got these horrible, horrible patterns behind everything. That's making the text hard to read. It's like somebody discovered they had PageMaker and didn't know when to stop.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
No, this is a dark period. And look, I was a teenager in the late 90s. And, even at the time, I thought things were getting looter. I was not attracted to the advertising. I was not attracted to the magazines. Now, obviously, I was like the exception, not the rule, because everyone wouldn't have made these changes if they didn't work. But I think just about everyone looks back today. Even the people that were taken in by it at the time and are like, what was the industry collectively thinking in the 90s? And, they just, Sega kind of opened, they rode the tiger. They got on the tiger, and then the whole industry couldn't get off. And I'm not just being like, those kids back then, because I was the kid back then. So, obviously not all of it was terrible, but it's like the industry really took a hard turn in a specific direction, and you basically had to follow it there or you had to get off. I think that's what happened to Andy Eddy.
Yeah. He basically just gets ousted. They're trying to revamp the magazine. It's going to keep going for a couple more years in this new guise. But yeah, it's just a sign of the times at this point, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
But yeah, the cool era is upon us.
Absolutely. And now that video games are cool, or now that software is cool, we can also start, inducting it into museums. That is no kind of transition at all, but Smithsonian inducts software.
The Smithsonian Institute has begun to induct important works of software into its collection, the first of which is Microsoft Word.
I'm assuming this was sponsored by the Microsoft Corporation.
It's possible, but I mean, if you're going to look at a single piece of software that represents the integration of computers into everyday life, you could do worse than Microsoft Word.
But WordPerfect's still out there in 1993. I mean, it's not the monolithic be-all and end-all of the word processor market, let alone of the software market. Obviously, if you're going to induct software, Microsoft Word is going to be one you're going to put in at some point. But, like, why is that the first? And I have to imagine it's because Microsoft was like, hey, why don't we donate you a copy of this thing you can preserve? I could be wrong about that. But it's like, that is an odd choice for the first.
You know, if they had gone with Excel, I would have agreed. Excel would have been a much clearer answer, I think.
But VisiCalc would have been a clearer answer. I think VisiCalc is the obvious choice. Just like when you start Video Game Hall of Fame, you have to put Super Mario Brothers in, or you start a Video Game People Hall of Fame or award, and Shigeru Miyamoto has to be the first one to get it. It's like, it feels like there's an obvious answer here, and it's VisiCalc.
Good point. Yeah, VisiCalc would have to be it. Although, I mean, by 93, unless you're a historian of computer software, VisiCalc has been all but forgotten.
But the point of the Smithsonian is to be a historian of the culture.
I know. And this is then the question, I guess. You're right. Something's wrong here. Something is terribly, terribly wrong.
Because like I said, Microsoft hasn't even blown away all of the competition yet in word processing. WordPerfect is still very viable in this period. My family was still using WordPerfect in 1993. That's
true. I mean, I learned to type on WordPerfect in 1995. So yeah. It's who knows? They must have paid something off.
I think the fix is in.
Yeah.
I'm starting this conspiracy theory right here, right now on the Time Machine. Well. And now these are miscellaneous stories, so I have the worst time connecting them. So I'm just going to come out and say it once again. Vectrex makers post OG files online.
According to Video Games Magazine, the original designers of the Vectrex have posted all of their technical information, including all the software written for the system, in one big binary file, which can be found on the internet. Guides on how to hack a Vectrex cartridge and switch out the EEPROMs and downloading software to it are on the web too, even though it is still hard to find the appropriate chips.
Yeah, this is really a very interesting story. I was not aware that this had happened in 1993, but this is kind of the first kind of tentative steps into the modern homebrew scene right here is what this is.
Very much so. I mean, one of the interesting things that they comment on is that Davila, the new editor of the magazine, he's the magazine's apparently resident old school guy, and he's actually been trying to do this game dump so he could have all of the Vectrex games, but he can't find the EEPROM that he needs. Obviously, these are not things that are super easy to get a hold of at this point. The manufacturers and so forth are harder to contact because we don't have online commerce yet. I mean, nowadays, probably go to Alibaba and find it in 5 minutes. But at this point in time, these are things that are hard to come by. but there is a very active scene, and they use the word internet, which is the interesting part for me. They don't call it, Usenet. They don't call it, bulletin boards. They're talking internet. This idea that you would just find these files on the internet, that somebody would just post them, is, quite revolutionary.
Absolutely. I mean, it's creeping towards the ROM movement. It's creeping towards the homebrew movement by also having the console specifications out there, and all very, very early. And for it to be such an obscure system as the Vectrex, I mean, on the one hand, it makes sense because it's the one where nobody's going to care if you put all this stuff out. Nobody's going to send you cease and desists, So I mean, on the one hand, it makes sense, but on the other hand, very interesting that such an obscure console would be paving the way for so much of this.
Yeah. Well, also the games, there's not a lot of games, so putting them all online isn't hard. And I wonder how much of this is going to influence emulation creation for the Vectrex.
Exactly. That's, I think it had to.
Yeah. So this report, I mean, we're going to see more and more emulation stuff over the next year or two, especially through online distribution, is really going to push that into overdrive.
Yep. And now we do have to end this episode in a way that is more traditional for our 40-year jumps than it is for our 30-year jumps, with a brief RIP and lament to companies gone by as Camerica shuts down.
GamePro magazine speculates that Canadian game publisher and makers of the game Genie may be no more, as they had no booth at CES. Camerica does in fact file for bankruptcy in 1993.
Yes, Camerica, like Icarus, flew too close to the sun and got themselves quite burned. Camerica, of course, was outside of the United States, the company that manufactured and sold the game Genie. And this worked out so well with them that they partnered with Codemasters on another product called the Aladdin Deck Enhancer, which allowed for some Game Genie type things, as well as bypassing the lockout chip and presumably being able to market cheaper game cartridges that could then plug into the Deck Enhancer and be used on your NES. And unlike the Game Genie, this one was not a big hit. And I have to imagine that the effort put into this failed project is probably what drove Camerica over the edge.
Yeah, I'm guessing you're probably right. I mean, let's face it, they just never really managed the jump to 16-bit. The money they got back from winning the Game Genie case never really made up for the losses that they had. This was something they lamented at the time, that, the deposit the court forced Nintendo to post, which was then later paid out to Camerica, never really equaled what they lost on sales. And yeah, it's just wasn't a viable business anymore.
Yep. So pour one out for Camerica.
There you go. And that is also the end of our show then. We have no more stories. But, Alex, as the co-host, you have one final task. What is the word of the episode?
Mortal Kombat! I mean, what else could it be? It's not only a reference to Mortal Monday, but we had so many other Mortal Kombats going on, whether it be Bill White defecting, or Sega and Nintendo at CES, or companies in the computer space merging or diversifying as they try to come to grips with the scary new world that is unfolding before them. Everyone seems to be locked in a fierce struggle at this time, and no one is quite sure how that is going to end.
Very astute observation. So, Mortal Kombat is the word of the episode. Okay, Alex, remind all the fine folks where they can catch your wonderful work.
That would be theycreateworlds.com, where you can see our podcast, or listen to our podcast, I guess. They Create Worlds, which is available from all of the major podcast distributors and whatnot. Of course, there is the book, They Create Worlds, the story of the companies that shape the people and companies. I know my own subtitle. They Create Worlds, the story of the people and companies that shape the video game industry, Volume 1, available from the publisher CRC Press, as well as from Amazon and other major online retailers. Someday there'll even be a Volume 2. It's promised right there in the thing, at least unless I pull a Xenogears, which, was episode 5, and then look what happened. No, it's coming along. So, yeah, They Create Worlds is the brand, and that's where you can find me.
Excellent. And remember, everybody, if you want to support the show, every little bit helps. I know money's tight nowadays, but $1 a month gets you on our Patreon list. And links for all of that are in the show notes. So, with that being said, everybody, have fun. Mortal Monday! Oh, that sounded more like a football player than a... Let's see. Mortal Monday! No, yeah, I just... now
you gotta do it like the kid. You have to do it like the kid, high pitched. Mortal